Morning, everyone. My name is Max Flannery. I'm the co-founder and president of Agile Media Group. At Agile, for those who are not familiar, we are a data-driven out-of-home advertising company currently focused on truck-side advertising. Essentially, we partner with the last-mile delivery vehicles that are delivering food and beverage to bars and restaurants in the most populated areas of the top 25 markets across the United States, and wrap those vehicles on behalf of brands like yourselves to turn them into mobile billboards. To take that a step further, we have a data platform that tracks anonymous mobile phone locations to say how many people saw that ad, and then how many people took action on it. Did they visit your website? Did they make a purchase on your website, et cetera? So we've seen a large influx of business from direct-to-consumer brands, particularly after the implementation of iOS 14.5. And because of that, we thought it would be an interesting topic for discussion today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to my wonderful co-founder and Agile's Chief Revenue Officer, Tom Shea.
Thank you, guys. So wanted to start off with a quick round of applause to the FounderMade team here, if we don't mind, because some of the busiest schedules to try to get these people all together. So when we were thinking about putting together this panel, obviously a lot's changed. I'm sure folks on the brand side, this is really top of mind. And we were thinking about who the correct people to build a panel with would be. And we could have went brands, but I think if we went with brand executives, you're sharing one experience. So we designed it a little bit different. I'm excited to introduce our panelists because instead of having experience with one brand, these are the people that brands are usually paying to help them overcome things like iOS 14.5. So instead of going really deep on one brand, I think they represent a pretty good pulse on the industry and what they're seeing in the market, which we're excited to share a little bit about with the audience. So without further ado, excited to introduce our first panelist, CEO of Sharma Brands, needs no introduction, consulting and growth firm for some of the most exciting CPG brands from Feastables and Crocs, Nick Sharma. Excited to next introduce the founder and CEO of Quan Media Group, the first out-of-home company for modern brands who want to build a real-world identity. And then finally, our final panelist has a very storied career from VaynerMedia to founder to now director of go-to-market strategy at the prestigious branding firm Red Antler. So iOS 14.5, I figured it would first be helpful to talk a little bit about what's actually changed, because as brand executives, I'm sure some of this falls within your wheelhouse. Some of you have hired brilliant people to sort of manage this process, but just to ground everyone and give them the context, really what happened is IDFA, which is identification for advertisers, used to be opt-in by default. And in practice, what that meant was if a platform like Facebook is advertising, Nike shoes to someone like myself, if I click on Nike shoes ad, Facebook can see if I convert or not. And that powers their algorithm to do lookalike marketing and all the machine learning to say, hey, Tom converted. Let's go find people that look exactly like Tom with his interests, his race, his age, his household income. What's changed after that, as IDFA is now opt-out by default, is once you click on that ad, it becomes a walled garden in the context of Facebook. They do not know what you did after you clicked the ad, whether you converted or not. So when you think about the feedback loop that powers that lookalike algorithm, it's something that's changed, and we've seen CPMs and CACs sort of spike as a result. So hopefully that's helpful in just grounding the context of this conversation. I did want to start off with the first question here, and we'll give it to Nick. I think you can probably talk about this the best, and I'm curious what you've seen in terms of the effects and the fallout since post iOS 14.5 in the context of these digitally native brands that you work with.
It's like that chaos scene of every movie where everything is burning and people are throwing chairs across the room. It's basically kind of like what Tom said. So prior to this opt-out by default, Facebook could really see if I went to the IMI site and I looked at a specific flavor of ramen, and then I went to this third picture on the product page, out of 10, they could score me on intent. And then they could say, all right, based on our history and our learnings of advertising IMI, we know that when somebody's a 7.63, we can show them this messaging and this creative and get them to convert pretty quickly. And that's all gone now. And so the problem is that there's a lot of brands still running digital advertising as if Facebook has the ability to track everything that's going on post-click. And and so as a result, a lot of brands have taken a big hit in terms of how they can advertise, how much budget they can allocate. And really it's because they're still focused on a lot of the previous advertising tactics when IDFA was defaulted to be opted in. One thing that we've been doing with a lot of our brands is focusing heavily on storytelling versus selling the product, because what we want to do is create that intent from the customer rather than from an algorithm which kind of pushes you down the intent funnel. And so we found that with all of our clients where we were doing more creator-led storytelling or editorial-led storytelling, or really just like even telling who the founder is and why this product was created, we saw less shift there or less effect there. But the brands that were heavily reliant on just pumping Facebook ads and pumping these 15-second quick cut videos and really selling a product and an offer, those are the ones that were really heavily affected.
Yeah, and I think that's a great transition. I could open this to Maggie and Brian. Nick just spoke about what he's seen some brands do. I think you guys have a different perspective on the branding and on the out-of-home side, respectively. I'm curious what you guys have seen brands and how that's changed what you've seen in the market.
I'll let ladies first.
Thank you.
Go for it.
I mean, I think it was perfectly said. I think we're moving into a world where pull and not push is being rewarded from the brand side, creating value and understanding that you have to earn the trust and the engagement from your user is far more important. You can't just enter the back door and pull a lever and show up in someone's feed. So, you know, we at Red Antler, we're starting way more upstream. We're thinking about, you know, how are we creating this sort of brand gravity that facilitates that kind of engagement. So, you know, even if you start talking about how critical first-party data and opt-in becomes now, that we really have to earn that consent from a user, you need to start from the ground up and build a brand that's built around storytelling, around value, and understanding that you don't get to just turn up and ask for something anymore. A lot of this kind of climate makes me really think about where we were maybe 10 plus years ago when we were still convincing brands that social media was a viable channel to reach somebody. Gary Vaynerchuk used to pound this idea of give, ask. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Jab, Right Hook book or read it. It's probably still on your shelf. But the idea is, you know, you can't just turn up and ask for somebody to spend money anymore. It's more viable, this idea, than it ever was before, I think, today, given how crowded the consumer marketplace is. But the idea is, as a brand, you need to give something before you ask for something. And it's never been more true, given that, you know, again, like, you're not just able to rely on data to drive value. It has to start with the brand and what you're offering and what you're showing up with. So it is just a massive shift from being able to just push messaging and content and actually creating the desire and the pull to invite users into your world.
Yeah, I think that kind of segues into brand legitimacy. And when you talk about brand legitimacy, it kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with out-of-home. And what I've seen and what we've seen, you know, in the past, out-of-home has been utilized as a channel, I think, that comes second or third, you know, in a brand's media mix. And then there's the whole mythology that out-of-home could only be an awareness tactic, and then it's super expensive, and it's a 6-month lead time. And we're seeing a lot of brands come to us now saying, you know, in light of what Tom spoke about, like, what can we do to really put ourselves out there in a smart, audience-first, cost-efficient way? And I think we've done a really great job of working with some early-stage growth brands and later-stage brands in the D2C world, with finding smart and unique ways to help get them out, you know, in a respective market, whether it's doing something as simple but strategic as wild postings that obviously have fantastic creative, or doing, you know, a massive painted wall in a core market in a key area of town that indexes high against, you know, a brand's core audience. You know, throwing some sort of QR code or batch code or something on there to really, you know, kind of communicate and encourage, you know, the audience to interact. And it's been a really fun time, especially coming out of 2020, to be in the out-of-home world, because I think we're kind of seeing a resurgence, and brands realize that it can be used a lot more as just, you know, an awareness channel.
Yeah, that's great, guys. So this made me think of a question that I think is pretty interesting. So Maggie, you talked about give, ask. Nick, you talked about first-party data. I think there's an interesting discussion around that intersection. So Maggie, I'm curious, in the context of the give, ask story, what's an example of how you can give? And Nick, maybe you could weigh in on first-party data is the new like currency of D2C or digitally native brands. Like, what have you seen in the market of people trying to capture that information?
Sure. So, in the context of give, that could be entertainment, that could be community. Ariana mentioned with Half Days, they built a Slack channel. I mean, that's such an innovative, simple way of reaching an audience and adding value that is at everyone's fingertips. And I think that some of these channels start to feel very disruptive when they're repurposed in different ways. So whether it be access to community, entertainment, just looking at a category differently, it's about really understanding, what is the environment surrounding these users day in and day out, and where can a brand authentically slip into that and add value that isn't just about their product. When we think about brand building, we're looking at it as far as this brand world we're creating. It's not just necessarily a space for somebody who has a need state that our product solves. It's creating a brand world where even if you're not in the market for this product, or even, necessarily the audience that would utilize it the best way, it's a world that you can't not be in because it adds so much intrinsic value outside of your product. So, I'm sure Nick can speak to a little bit more about what they've seen work tactically, but from a brand building perspective, it's really about, understanding that people look beyond value directly as correlated to product, and understanding that the essence of a brand isn't what your product does, it's why that matters. And being able to tell that story in a meaningful way is how you get that opt-in and that permission. You have to earn it, and earning the opt-in has to come from something outside of your product.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, I think there's like 3 examples that come to mind. One is if you guys ever follow like influencers, YouTubers, creators, you'll notice they're always putting out content, and then once in a while they'll ask you to click a link in a bio or click a link in the description to support them or buy something. That's a great example of like 98% giving, 2% asking. The second example that comes to mind, does anybody know that brand New York or Nowhere? It's a clothing brand based here. So they did this thing that was really smart where they said, we're going to create these wallpaper packs for your iPhone, something that's completely irrelevant to sweatshirts and hats and hoodies and all this stuff. But you go to our store, you buy a free wallpaper pack, and you buy it through Shopify because you get it as a digital download. In exchange, you're getting this first-party data, the name, email, and phone number. And so they sold, hundreds of thousands of these free wallpaper packs, which costed them basically nothing, cogs or nothing.
Right.
And but then when it's time for them to have their product drop once a month or once every 3 weeks, they send one text message out to all the people they've collected as a result of the free wallpapers, and now they've got a 6-figure sales day within 30 minutes. The third example, which I think is even easier to do, is when I was at a company called Hintwater, we were trying to figure out, I knew that when we told our story, our founder story, in an editorial format, and then took people there versus told people, hey, come buy us, we're a 0 sugar, 0 calorie beverage, our LTV was significantly better, and our cost of customer acquisition was way lower because people were coming in with their own intent to buy the product, not because we were targeting them at the right time with the right ad. And so I thought, okay, what else can we do to get more of these people, kind of like our customers, in our, not funnel, but like in our sphere, I guess. And so Quantcast, which is an advertising company, they have this pixel called the Quantcast Measure Pixel. This thing is a gold mine. It's completely free. You put it on your website. It'll tell you where your customers shop, where they get their news, what kind of car they drive, what TV shows they watch, what type of music they listen to. And we created a publisher site called The Quench, where all we did was just reverse engineer all these traits that were high index for our best customers and create content for them. And we said, okay, if we just attract people who look like our best customers, we're going to create ourselves a really good kind of funnel with first-party data and also zero-party data, which is more like, zero-party is like adjectives to nouns, and first-party is the nouns. And then it becomes significantly easier to then advertise because we're not going out into this random universe of putting ads out there and spraying and praying, we're going to a very concentrated group of people who we know are already interested in the things that match our best customers.
Yeah, I love those responses, Maggie. The whole give, ask like mantra. When I think of like the more successful digitally native brands and some of the earlier panelists, like they are so supported by a community that like when that change did hit, I'm sure they saw some change in their numbers, but they were well hedged against that. So I think, to Nick's point, the days of brands dropping like 95% plus of their budget in Facebook or TikTok rapidly, I think, ending. Brian, I think this is an interesting segue into the concept of like earned media. And you've done a lot of, I think, very creative executions alongside brands. I think it's another great way when people think about hedging out of home as an interesting format where you're paying for an execution, but you can get a lot more than just that execution. So, any stories, any brands that come to mind? I love the farm one, which we can talk about, but I'll let you take it.
It's kind of funny because I was on my way to my parents in Long Island and bumper to bumper traffic on the LIE sitting behind this gorgeous wrap truck, which I did not know was an Agile truck until I brought it to Tom, and it was for Zola. And they had such incredible contextual creative, and for literally 25 minutes, I am staring at this brand, and I'm like, what a smart way. There's absolutely no out-of-home on Long Island. There's no way to really get out there unless you do those digitals way out in the Hamptons on, Sunrise. And to me, I'm like, that's a great example of a brand kind of like thinking outside the box, no pun intended, to really, penetrate an area where maybe there's a lack of out-of-home. But two brands that we've worked with recently that kind of have utilized a channel in a smart, strategic, and more importantly, cost-efficient way would be one, I think of Truff. We've worked with Truff for a while, and they have created this really strong playbook of focusing in on a market, connecting with that market and the consumers and what the market is known for from a food standpoint. So in Philadelphia around Expo East last September, it was running a contest for who has the best cheesesteak. And it was, utilizing obviously social but amplified via out-of-home on Market Street through multiple digital screens and a large static wall that costed really very minimal in the grand scheme of things, and had everyone from Eagles players to obviously everyone in town throughout the course of obviously the beginning of Expo East engage throughout this contest. And it worked so well for them that they just recently replicated it again in Chicago with obviously Deep Dish and having a massive board in the center of West Loop, surrounded by digital street level out of home with multiple creative versions, because you can run as many creatives as you want when you talk about digital street level. And it's just for Truff, they get it. They don't have to spend $1 million. They are smart in focusing on core markets that work well for them, but also play into their whole brand identity, and they engage their consumer. And I mean, lastly, I think what's super fun, also being in New York, is we're working with Coterie right now, and they're using a mix of strategic while postings, which is nothing new. A lot of brands have done them before, and they have a really great board, in Soho to promote their new pull-up pant for toddlers. But the cool thing that they're doing is we worked with them to kind of come up with these really fun chalk stencils in key parks in New York and Brooklyn that are eco-friendly and wash away, but are actual hopscotch boards that have just a brand name. So if you're in Domino Park, you'd see this hopscotch board, and you're obviously going to want to engage with it. We have photos of kids doing it, adults doing it, and you have the brand name and the website, and that is simply it. And it costs minimal, but it was a unique way for Coterie to connect in an area where their consumer is. How are you going to connect with children? But that's a smart way to do it, and it's worked so well for them. It was their first out-of-home launch, so I mean, for us, it's really fun to sit with a brand and say, hey guys, you don't have to spend $500K to do something crazy in New York City to make an impact. Find out where your audience is, we'll help you, and then let's brainstorm and come up with a creative and smart way to kind of reach that audience. So
yeah, and we see it a lot. Nick, you and I have talked a lot about influencer brands and the virality of those formats and things that have played out like that. Brian, I'm curious so Brian's being modest. He just won 2 of the most prestigious out-of-home awards at a recent out-of-home conference.
In tandem, though, with credit to Thinks and Mischief.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. It's always a team effort. Brian, I was wondering if you could talk, and maybe Nick a little bit as well, about attribution for other formats. So Brian, obviously you know a lot about out-of-home. I think we're also seeing a lot of people capturing SMS with even on out-of-home executions. Brian, we see it all the time now. It's text, Taylor Swift's coming to town. She'll do an out-of-home ad that says text Taylor to text me 888-555, and they capture that first-party data, and they can use it in so many clever, creative ways, and it becomes an asset. So attribution, first-party data, SMS. You guys want to just riff off that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have found the perfect blend of personalization and automation with Quan, and we partner with AdQuick Software. They're an automated out-of-home buying platform that has a few good things in terms of measurement. So we've offered brands that we work with the opportunity to do causal lift analysis, which has become a big thing, especially for more early stage growth brands. We have done for larger scale brands an attribution dash, which is obviously it incorporates multipliers, and it's a whole separate conversation, but you're able to understand who saw what out-of-home placements you're running and then who took action, conversions, exposures, so on and so forth. And we do things around obviously capturing exposed, unexposed maids, and obviously either, creating mobile retargeting opportunity or sharing them with the brand and allowing them to do what they want to do with them. So I think it's been exciting for me personally, because when I was in the large agency world, not to trash them, but we always spoke about doing measurement and attribution, in the out-of-home space, but it ended up being 99.9% of the time just awareness. And I think over at least 50% of the campaigns we've run this year have had some measurable component. So it's not there, it's not perfect yet. We're working on it, but out-of-home does have a way to measure effectiveness now, and I think we've kind of offered up a nice little, smorgasbord of ideas for the brands that we work with in that regard.
Yeah, also some of our brands that have worked with Agile, we saw that we can literally track CPAs on Facebook even, retargeting CPAs of people who've seen these trucks. These trucks magically collect data.
First party location data.
Yeah, it's location data. It's like a moving geofence around the city. And so I'll give you an example. There's a food and beverage brand that we did this with. Their Facebook CPA was normally $70. Their retargeted CPA on Facebook after people who were exposed to the truck was $14. And it was, the cost of the trucks is not that much considering you can really pump retargeting ads and get new customers. But you can also then, it creates this perception that that brand owns that truck. It's like there's a psychological advance to it as well. But all that said, I think, out of home has definitely gotten a lot more trackable and a lot more effective in terms of leaning more towards the side of performance and tracked marketing versus just this like shouting from the rooftops of, like Gary used to say, like billboards were somebody who counted how many people were there and like saw the billboard. And that's how it used to be. And now I think we're seeing a lot more actions. Brian just sent an email out from the
AAA, like the out-of-home association.
Big out-of-home association where like 40% of people are taking some kind of action, whether it's Googling, taking a photo, posting on social media, visiting the brand at a later point. And, if you don't have the direct measurement tools tied in, you can run things like post-purchase surveys. You can use attribution tools like a Northbeam. But again, it's all just data that kind of helps you guide that next media buy. Maybe not to live on directly, though.
Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to close here, and then we'll open it up to a few questions from the audience with what you guys think the future media mix looks like for digitally native brands post iOS 14.5. And Nick, I'll let you start, and we'll model it off whatever your answer is.
If this was like a year ago, I would say you could go 100% digital and be completely fine. I think now I would say, a good chunk is still probably programmatic digital, paid social, paid search. A lot of our times now when we work with clients, we almost start with direct mail. We start with pitching these agile trucks because they're so trackable. And we start with creators. And so it's this combination of like direct mail or offline and online. And if you're a brand that's selling in retail, we probably push a little bit heavier offline as well. When we have a brand that goes retail, we just had House go in retail. We light up some billboards with Brian over here. And again, those are all trackable as well. And you can see, what's driving efficiency on Facebook, but now you can also see what's driving efficiency offline, whether that's direct mail, out of home, et cetera.
Yeah, and this could be a whole other panel by itself, but creative iteration and just like, especially Gen Z, such a diverse generation, like you can't just lead with one ad and hope it's going to work. People are pumping so much money into this ABCDEF test, all of these different creatives. But
yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, obviously I speak a little bit more so towards out of home, just out of fairness and full transparency, since I don't really work, fully in other channels. But I do see out of home becoming a little bit more of a primary channel for brands, but not necessarily, like I said before, in the $500K, $1 million spend way. It's more about, utilizing audience insights and audience data and tools that are at our fingertips now to kind of craft a little bit more of an audience-first strategy. Whether it's utilizing news star data and understanding what part of a given market your audience indexed highest in, and then focusing on said neighborhood and spending effectively that way and tying in something on the measurement end. I think that kind of out-of-home works so well with other channels in tandem that I think, as opposed to looking at it as a 2-year down the road play for brands, it's maybe more of like half a year in, and obviously in tandem with the paid search or social or direct mail, where it's proven to be super effective when working collaboratively with.
So 90% out of home is what
Yeah, 90% out of home. That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Maggie.
So I actually think there's something really meaningful about that, and I'm going to give this sort of abstract creative brand answer to this question, which is I feel like we are really moving into a time where consumers want to be the ones discovering you, not being the ones discovered. It needs to feel like serendipity and magic when they see that agile ad roll by as they're walking down Soho, or they run into a hopscotch chalk drawing in a park. It's this sense of kind of rediscovering these moments of truth for yourself instead of feeling like somebody's following you around in your digital behavior and feels very predatory that way. So I think from a channel perspective, I completely agree with what's been mapped out here, but I also think things like Slack, for example. I know I keep going back to that, but I think there are ways that we can look at some of these older channels like email. ECRM is incredibly effective if it's done right. Adding value through storytelling in those channels and newsletters and content creation, collaborating with creators, just looking at places where you can give those moments of aha to a consumer versus them just feeling like there's another product being shoved in front of their face. It's interesting at Red Antler in particular, we see a lot of really wild innovations come through our door as far as early stage pre-launch growth. Even growth phase right now I think is having a real moment. But we're seeing some really interesting things happen in the blockchain space where there's an inherent opt-in. So there's new channels being developed for brands to reach consumers in a way that has that value exchange embedded in the actual transaction to the extent that someone walks out holding a free coffee. So there is, I think it's about looking through the lens of discovery for the consumer and putting them at the center of your engagement, and ensuring that whatever you do and whatever you ask, there's a little magic and a little bit of value being sent first before you even mention your brand name.
I love ending on that. I think the consumer discovering the brand is such a really profound thought, because it's true, right? Everyone's had that frequency cap of 17 on Instagram, and you're like, please stop giving me this ad.
Yeah.
You clearly bought something on me. Okay, we're gonna open it up to a few questions, and then we're gonna wrap here. Go ahead.
How about customer-driven marketing, like advocacy, referral, actually using your customers to comment on that?
I personally think that's huge, getting testimonials and reviews from firsthand consumers and using that to kind of foster trust, I think is really valid. I do think there's a fine line between how you ask for more from your customer and then how you're rewarding that engagement. So I think it definitely has to feel like a value exchange. Again, I think that that's such a critical component to that. But I think in a world where trust in consumer brands is thin, I think using advocacy is a great way to tell your brand story.
Yeah. It's almost like influencer marketing. It's like there's inherent trust there before they're trying to talk to you about something. Go ahead.
Yes, you've been talking about Facebook as a platform, but what kind of returns do you see on TikTok as far as things like that?
Actually, pretty close. Yeah, it depends. I think the biggest variable with TikTok is, does a brand, the brand that's running TikTok, if you're a sub $50 million brand, does your brand DNA inside know how to use TikTok? And if they do, then it works. And a great example of this is Bobby Brown with Jones Road Beauty. If you don't, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go hire an agency, and I'm gonna, we're turning on a TikTok strategy, you have no chance. Yeah.
We'll take one more. Back right. You. Yep.
Thanks. Okay. Just briefly, I know you briefly touched on direct mail kind of at the end of the conversation, but I would love to understand if you have any thoughts on creative strategy for direct mail to make it work for our business.
I got one just off the cuff. I got direct mail that was a magnet for my fridge, which I'm sure the COGS was higher, but like I'm using it to hold paper on my on my fridge right now, and that worked. But I'm sure you have more meaningful feedback.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, one is obviously figuring out like how it stays in the house with is like a magnet. Otherwise, I think direct mail, where we see the best return on direct mail is going after people who have already been a customer. So not even using it as a prospecting tool, but if you've got 50, 100,000 customers that have bought from you and maybe haven't purchased in the last 90 days, reaching out, and maybe you can qualify it even more by saying people who haven't opened your email on Klaviyo. And you reach out with direct mail, that's where we usually see the best returns on direct mail. And then on top of that, from a creative standpoint, you can have an offer that you're pushing. You could use something like a batch code. I don't know if you're familiar with batch. Or you can just make it like, you can make something like a crossword puzzle and just make it completely opposite of direct response. And usually sometimes that works in your favor as well. But I would say whatever is kind of very on brand for you, but at the same time is pushing, the KPI you're trying to hit.
I think it's a great time to reinvent the rules of some of those channels.
Totally.
And
Definitely.
kind of infuse them with, again, that intangible magic. I don't know, depending on your sort of brand ethos, thinking about those little details that change how it's kind of taken into the home. Is it compostable? Is it a crossword puzzle?
Right.
I mean, there's so many ways to kind of wrap that message in something that gives that aha moment. That I think that those channels are still really viable. I think we can just throw out what we used to think we had to do on them and, get a little weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
Definitely get weird.
And Brian, I think in Out of Home, we've seen a lot more of the location-based direct mail, where it's like, okay, you're hitting this part of
Yeah.
town with this.
That's why Out of Home works really well with direct mail.
Right.
Usually we see a lot of pairing with those two channels, so for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Could we get a quick round of applause for our panelists?